think if you guys can mute.
This meeting is being recorded.
I'm getting an echo on my end.
Okay, you're getting an echo. I don't know why
Yeah,
that is happening.
You can just mute.
Okay, I think I should mute.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so Adil Moughal, I'm a backend engineer. I've been writing APIs for about 7 years now, and yeah, so Emmanuel asked me to come and give you guys a session, and I presented myself. So I didn't know how to go into this because I'm generally not a fan of slides and basically reading out notes to people, but yeah, so I think I just stuck to that because it's no other alternative. So probably how many of you guys here are familiar with REST APIs in general?
Okay, so Adil, sorry, they'll be using the chat since they are muted, so they'll be dropping on the chat so you can go through it.
Okay, that's the context. Okay, fine. So let me just share my screen. In general programming, like how many people here have been coding in any language, monoliths, web applications, anything of the sort?
I think Adil, we lost you
Okay.
for a moment. If you could
So yeah, so I'm asking if there's anyone who has been like doing active programming around web applications, general web design, if it's just monoliths, anything of the sort. I take, okay, that's good. Ademi. So what have you been like building, Ademi, Joshua, if I'm getting that right? Also, if I could get permissions to share my screen.
yeah, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, thank you. The host has disabled attendee screen sharing.
Oh, okay. You can try again. I think it's active now.
Okay. Yeah, so Matrix and Alarm website. Okay, that's good. So basically, a REST API, or generally an API, is it's a set of definitions and protocols for building and integrating software. It's a governing mechanism of how software integrates with each other, and it brings a level of sanity to developers. So how this works is you get a basic set of structures that you need to follow to be able to allow two different softwares to integrate. So assuming you have a website. So traditional website designs were more around monoliths where you have your front end and back end within the same code. So if any of you have just tinkered around with PHP, what you would do is you would have your script to fetch data within the same script that displays data, and you basically call that your application. So there's no like separation of concerns. So when separation of concerns comes into play, you have front ends. So front ends are typically what you see as a client or a user interacting with a web application, and then you have the backend. So the backend is basically what drives the front end with data, and the backend is what we have that fetches data from the storage. So if you're using a database, something like MySQL, and then it handles all the business logic, and then it has to be able to take all that information and deliver it to the front end to consume. So now this is where REST APIs come into play. So basically you have the idea of a backend independent on its own, and then you have an idea of a front end. And these two have to communicate one way or another. So how they communicate is via APIs. And now REST is basically a governing mechanism of an API. It ensures that it ensures basically a standard within the industry that people can use when they're building these things. So assuming like yes, so probably some of you have seen like 4.4 responses, right? And generally a 4.4 response would mean not found, or yeah, the resource is not available. So that's now a confirmation of the REST API. So if it was not up to REST API and you had someone else just building their own way of interacting, then some of them probably would choose a 4.4, and that 4.4 made a success. Then that brings now about confusion. So basically REST API is just there to give you a set of industry standards to follow and conform to ensure that your API can be looked at by other developers, and other developers can easily be able to integrate with your software. The main thing to think about when building APIs is you're not the consumer of the API. You're merely providing something that will be consumed by someone else. And humans being humans, we all have individual ways of thinking. And yeah, so what I might think might be better for you, and when you consume the API, what you think might be better for you might be different, because we're all humans. So now to bridge that sort of difference in thinking, we have this sort of rules and policies that we conform to be able to assist. So I don't know if like there's any question anyone wants to ask in regards to that, but yeah, that's a general idea you could have, like thinking about what APIs are and how they basically come into software and into tech. So yeah, so since most of you are beginners, I won't like go into details in terms of like all these notes. You can read them up. So I'll basically just go over them at a high level and just try to elaborate, so you have a clearer mental picture when you're going through like documentation and stuff in depth, just to be able to make you understand. So yeah, so we go back to constraints for uniformity. So as I said, like REST standards are basically there to guide things to conform to one policy. And how that is identification of resources. So if you have, for example, let's say you're creating a software that has users, right? And those users are basically what your software integrates with. Sorry, not integrates with, but what that's built around. So when you have your API is going to be built in such a way that the interface, so the interface that will interact with. So this is your front end now getting data from your backend. It gets it through an interface. So that's why it's an API, application programmable interface. And this interface is supposed to be able to identify each unique resource. So if it's a user, you're able to identify a single user using the given API. So I'll get down to examples in a few. And then manipulation of resources. So this is now to allow you to perform things like updating a resource. So updating means modifying a resource on the server. So if you have a user that you've created and is called Mohammed, so what the API should give you an ability to is to manipulate that Mohammed on the database and update it to, let's say, Adil, or update it to whatever name you want. So that's generally the thinking around manipulation of resources. Self-descriptive messages. So when you're building an API, you need to make sure that whatever your client is getting from the API should be something they understand. So back to, you're not building the API for yourself to consume, you're building the API for other people to utilize and consume. So in this way, you have to make sure that whenever you build an endpoint, the responses that you return are very clear. Like if a user is not found and the client is trying to retrieve the user, you return a not found to the client instead of like a bad request or something. So your APIs generally have to be very self-descriptive in the messages. And one advantage of using REST as its own is that it gives you the ability to do so. So some REST standards include like 200 status code represents a success, of 400 status code represents a bad request. So this is like assuming you have an API to update a user, and the only thing that's updatable on the user is the name, and you try to update something else like the age. So that would cause
Okay, Adil, I don't know if you can hear me. So we lost you. So I don't know if I'm the only one, but we can't hear you.
You're not the only one. His screen went off. I don't. Okay, I think. Okay, he's still on the call.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I dropped off. So I forgot where I was going. I don't know if anyone can remind me where I dropped off. Okay, no one. Okay, so I think I was going on about status codes, the status responses, self-descriptive messages. So the advantage of REST API is it gives us the ability, like out of the box, to conform to standards. Like a 200 would be a success, a 404 would be a not found, a 43 would be an authorized, a 401 would be unauthenticated. So these are all self-descriptive error codes that when someone is integrating with your API and they come across it, they don't need to even go back to the documentation because you clearly understand a 404 is a not found. So you look at how you've integrated your API. So REST is stateless by design. REST is stateless by design, yeah. So in terms of stateless by design is the server never needs to remember the context of your request. So you have your front-end application, which is independent of your back-end application. The REST API sits on your back-end application. And whenever the front-end communicates to your your backend should never remember the context of that request. The only thing that it serves the purpose is to return data to the front end. So if a front end, for example, if the front end, for example, requests for a user, let's say user one, right? You get user one. All the backend should do is respond with that user one, and that's it. So it's always up to the front end to manage their state in what they want to do and how they want to handle their contexts. And your backend basically should just be there to receive a request and give back a response, and that's it. So yeah, so it basically it eliminates the whole monolith sort of architecture that we used to have in the past. Yeah, so REST APIs are basically resource based. So retrieve and manipulate resources on a server, as I explained earlier. So we have keywords on REST, and that would generally be gets. So a gets is itself descriptive, that you use that to retrieve any sort of information that you want off a server. Post is there to create resources on the server. So if you look at something like, something like this. So post, so this would be an endpoint, right? V1 users, and this would be a post endpoint that creates a user and returns an object. So that means is you'd basically post to this endpoint, tell it like create this user for me with ID 1. And all that would do is in the backend, once you receive the post request, you take in the user, take in the information, create an object and store that. A patch is what we were talking about, where you need to manipulate a resource on the server. So here you're basically performing updates on the resource. So for example, you created a user with the name Mohammed, and now you want to change that name to Adil. You'd perform a patch, which is just an update to the given item, and delete would basically remove the resource on a given server. So these keywords are what we use basically, and it sort of builds in the mentality when you're writing code that you're writing it for a specific reason. So if you're building an endpoint, knowing these keywords gives you the whole idea and mental clarity of how you want your endpoint to look. So a representation will always contain two data objects. So it's not always, but most of the time. And this is on REST. So data would contain the resource itself, meaning if you have a user resource, so yeah, I'd have shared Postman, but you guys are recording this, so I may not do that. So this is how it would look. So assuming you have a user resource, right? And this user resource has a first name and a last name. So we're saying that it will always contain two objects, data and meta. So you'll always have a response that would look something like that. And this would be a response in JSON. So you'd have data. And then you would have first name. And then you have last name. So this is what data means. So data will always contain the resource information. So first name and last name, since they're directly related to the user resource. And then you have something else called meta. So meta would contain anything other than the user resource that you need to send back to the front end. So for example, if this user on create was supposed to automatically log in, right? So how, depending on how you handle authentication, like one common practice is the use of JWTs. So probably you would do something like send back a token to the front end, and that's just usually a JWT token. So this will always be in the meta, since it's not directly related to the user resource itself. So I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, so basically, additional information is always stored in the meta, and data always contains the resource information. So responses usually have various data codes to preempt the server behavior. Yeah, so for example, if you're creating a user, right? And after your post request, what the server responds to you is with a 200. So when you get the status code, you're always certain that that 200 means a success. And you don't even like need to go additional steps and like pass a success message or something of the sort. A status code is really very important in preempting what the server responded with. So if you try to create a user and you end up with a 401 request, then that would generally mean that you're either not authenticated to perform that given action. And then if you have trying to do the same thing to create a user, but you have a 403, that means you're unauthorized. So generally the main difference between unauthenticated and unauthorized is unauthenticated, we don't know who you are and we don't know what you want to do. A 403 is we know who you are and we're not going to let you do that because probably you don't have permissions or we don't like you. But yeah, so that's generally around status codes. Continue tokens. Yeah, so this is basically what I told you. So this example is now a get instead of a post, and you'd get a user, and that would return a 200 success code. So this example is firstly wrong because we are returning one given object with the user information. So it would be a get request to a user ID, but I'll get back to that shortly. So the main thing to see here is that the status code of a get should be to 100 to be a success. Then the second thing is the resource information will always be enclosed by the data object. And then any additional thing that gets returned that's not directly returned to the resource should always be enclosed by the meta. So yeah, so I don't know if anyone has any questions from what I've said. If not, then we'll just go through some like high level thinking around designing an API for REST. Okay, so I see no questions and I'm going to proceed. So we want to build a user resource API for data manipulations on a table in MySQL. So yeah, I'll walk you through my approach and design practices I follow. So in this case, we're going to have a table called users. And then within the users table, we're going to have three fields. We're going to have the ID, which is auto incrementing on primary key. We're going to have a name, which is a string, and we're going to have an age. 401 and 404. So 404 is not found. Generally, when a resource is not available on the server and you're trying to request it, then you get a 404 request. And a 401 is when you're not authenticated. Basically, you're trying to perform something and the server does not know who you are and why you're trying to do something. So yeah, I hope you guys are sort of familiar with MySQL or Postgres or any sort of data structure that you can envision this. So the first thing we would do is we would create an endpoint to create a user. So how that endpoint would look like is it's going to be a post because we want to create, of course, and then it's going to be v1 users. So one major thing when developing APIs is to think about versioning. So you can have like version 1, version 2, version 3. It always helps to version your APIs in that when you're trying to sort of improve on it, you can actually start building up on it and have now, if you noticed v1 users was doing something wrong, then now you introduce v2 users. So V1 users remains to be active and in use as is, and you just introduce now a second endpoint like V2 users. This way, your clients are able to still use V1 users, and then you can sort of like guide them towards deprecation and help them migrate to VUs users as you deprecate V1 users. So basically, versioning around APIs is something really key when you're developing APIs to think about. Even if you're building small APIs for a start, it's always good to version them just in case you might never need to build a V2 or a V3, but just in case your system gets to a point where you need now to pivot to a V2 endpoint of the same, you're able to easily do that. The second thing is your resources are always to be in plural. So as we said, like REST is resource based, and within your endpoints, you would have users, cars, rabbits, donkeys, etc. Instead of doing something like that, because you're dealing with resources and not a resource. So that's majorly the thinking behind having plural with resources names. Yeah, so also I'm not sure how many of you guys are available with JSON or have worked with JSON, but generally when you're doing like APIs, that's usually the go-to means of communication. So you would have your posts, and the post would look like V1 users, and then your payload would be the name and the age. So if you notice something in the table, we had ID, name, and age. But when posting, we only have the name and the age. So this is because the ID is an auto increment integer, which is the primary key, and it's going to be auto populated when you store this data in the database. So that's how your post would look. So post to V1 users, this is the payload. So create for me this user with the name Mohammed and then age 19. So once you submit that to the server, your response would look something like this. So you would have a status code with a 201, which means you've successfully created a resource. And then the response JSON would be something like this as well, where you have data. Sorry, yeah, so that's something I missed on as well. So you would have data, since that always encapsulates every resource. You would have data. Yeah, so you'd have data, and within data now you have the things that are returned from the server. So ID1, which was auto-populated when the resource was stored in the table, you have the name and you have the age. So that's a type on the age as well. It should be 19 because we posted with 19. Yeah. So basically that's how a post response should look like. So now since we have created user with ID1, we now want to perform an update on the user. So this is a manipulation we want to perform. So how the endpoint would look like is it's going to be a patch v1 users slash. So this is really important to remember. So that's the resource. And then the ID. So what ID is this? So this is the ID that was created for the user. So if you look at the response of the post when creating the user, we get an ID back. So that's the ID we're going to pass in the route. And now this will enable us to know, or not to know, but to tell the server that, okay, I want to patch the users, but which user specifically? User one. And what do I want to do to user one? I want to update his name to Norman. So what that would do is it's going to go to the server. It's going to look for the user with ID 1 and update their name to Norman. Yeah, so something to note is when you get some time, just look at the difference between puts and patches. So both of these are used to update resources on the server. But for this example, I'll just stick to patches. So we have a patch. So update user one, set their name to Norman. So how the response for that would look like is this. So we have the status code, and then we have the same thing. So if you see, this was a mistake on my end as well. I forgot to encapsulate it. So you'd always have this response within. Yes, so your response would look like that. So it will contain the name, the ID, which is what we use to patch. What if you want to update all the users at once? So I'll get to that. So you have the name Norman, then you have age 12. So that's how the data response would look like. So note that the data response basically would have the whole data object. So it has everything, not only the field we updated. So that should be the standard response for a patch. And also the ID is the same because we only updated the record data. So what about if you want to update all the users at once? So how I would approach that is I would have a patch to v1 users, and then what I would do is I would have a data object. Have a data object, and then within this data object I would have an array. What the array would be used for is I'm getting this formatting wrong. Give me 1 second. That's data. Yes, and this array would basically contain nested objects. So what this would do is now within this nested objects is what you would is where now you'd place your identifier. So that would be the ID you want to update. So let's call it 1, and then you want to update name to Moha, and then you could have ID 2, and then you have, let's say, age 12. So such a patch request, what it would do is you've passed in your identifier and you've passed in the fields you want to update. So it's basically going to go in, look for the ID, and then update the name, and then look for the ID and update the age. So that's what I would do to update multiple users. So fetching a single user, yeah, same thing. So you would have a get request. You'd have a get request, v1 users, the ID of the user you want to fetch, the response status to 100, and then the response is standard. And then if you want to perform, if you want to fetch a list of users, yeah, so the same thing is, so you do a general get on v1 users. Since you don't know any ID and you just want the whole list, you won't pass any identifier to the front. And what that would return to you would be a response to 100, and it would be data as well. I forgot that. Yeah, so it will be data object with an array that has nested objects containing all the user information that you have. Yeah, so that's just a brief thinking of how I would go about setting up REST API for user resource. I think that's majorly it. So just a few notes I'd made that I think I would like to go through is always document before you build. Yes. So documenting before you build allows you to basically achieve mental clarity before you dive into the code. So just doing something like what we have done here is enough for a start. And it basically gives you all you need to think about. So for example, if you're doing a post, so if you document this, whenever you go into the code, you're ready, you know, I'm going to create a field for name, I'm going to create a field for age, and I'm going to make sure those get saved in the database. It also helps you with thinking through, how you set up your test cases, because one important thing when writing test cases, when writing APIs, is having test cases and making sure that all your endpoints are well tested going forward. And also the advantage of documenting is you avoid things where you return wrong status messages and wrong codes, etc. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Something else you might think about is tools around development. So generally, I use Postman a lot for developing. I use it for creating my endpoints. I would have shown you, but yeah, I can't like risk my local data being recorded. So probably next time. So yeah, I use Postman a lot. The other tools like Insomnia, which could be used, but generally the thing is, don't what's it called? Don't over obsess around different tools, like, because there's a lot of stuff on the internet about best tools, best practices. Just find something that sticks with you, and that's the best way to go about development. Yeah, so the other thing would be resource model reuse. So this is one key thing that you should always have in when you're developing APIs, is reusability. So if you notice that in all the examples I showed, like for posts, our response is this. For updates, the response is the same. For getting the response is the same, and even getting all the response is the same. So you have to think about reusability of resources. So one example is assuming we have the user API that we've created, and you have all your different methods. You have your post, you have your patch, you have your update, you have your delete. So I don't know how deep you guys have gone with code, but each of these would be a function on its own. And you would basically be able to inject a class called probably a user resource and make sure that all of those 5 models or function that we've talked about, which is the post, update, delete, retrieve, get, and get all, you make sure they always return the same set of data. So this allows you to have consistency across all your endpoints, and it also makes life easier for people who are integrating. Because what usually happens if you don't follow such an approach is you could have your post response and you forget to return a name, and then within your get response you return a name, and such of things become now your API becomes very very weird, because this example only has 3 fields, but you could be developing APIs with 14 fields, and for you to always remember to return all 14 fields for all given endpoints individually becomes challenging. You'll always find 1 or 2 are missing from one or the other. So yeah, one thing is always think about model reuse and stuff. And then probably, yeah, never reinvent the wheel. Don't try to be smart with getting all fancy with your responses. Just keep it simple, follow the structure, be API compliant. If if that's what you're doing. And then, yeah, generally being an API backend developer is super fun. Up until you start messing up your APIs and have to deal with a front-end team. But yeah, I think that's it for my presentation. There's a lot of stuff I might have gone at a high level, but yeah, I don't think going very deep into this for first class makes sense. But I hope it was a good introduction for you guys, and you're able to use it as a stepping stone towards further improvement. But yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Adil. Yeah, so guys, if you have questions, please drop it on the chat. Yeah, I think someone dropped the question. I don't know if you saw it, Adil, on the chat earlier on.
That's starting
Well,
from
how do you version control with REST APIs?
Okay, no,
Okay,
like how do
so
you use version control with REST API?
is it version on the REST API itself, like v1, v2, or is it like version control of the code, like on Git?
Okay, so I think it was Ife that made mention of that. So Ife, please, you can indicate on the chat.
Okay, while he's indicating, there's another question. He said, can REST API work with other languages aside Node.js?
Yes. So as I said, like REST is just it's just a protocol that defines how you should communicate. So you can build REST APIs in all languages, basically. In any language that's web-based, I would put it that way. So Java can have REST APIs, PHP can have REST APIs, Python can have REST APIs, Node has REST APIs. Yeah, so REST APIs are not limited to any language. I've been developing REST APIs with PHP of late, but aside from that, I've also done Node.js some time back. But yeah, it's language agnostic.
All right. Okay, the next question says 401 and 404 request. What is the major difference?
I think I highlighted on that, but a 401 is unauthenticated, so the server doesn't know who you are and what you want to do. And a 404 request is not found, so you're requesting a resource like fetch me user 3 on the server, and the server has no idea who user 3 is, so it's not found in the system. So that would be a 404 request. I think I showed you how to create an API with the REST framework. It's all around post, get, update, delete. So that's the REST framework. So how you create an API is basically you use those key tags, and you're able to do it. So just the thinking that we've gone through, all this is how you're able to design an API within REST. So this is an API we've decided. This is an API endpoint.
Okay, that answers that. So he's saying, can you maintain versions in REST API? How do you create an API with your REST framework?
Yeah, so that's what I've pointed. Like what we've gone through the whole case is how to build a REST API.
Okay, guys. So please, if you have any other question, you can just drop it on the chat. If you're having issues or you do not understand any part of the material that Adil just went through, you could indicate on the chat. But if you understand, you can just type it that I understand. So guys, please just make use of the chat. If you understood everything, just indicate. You can use the chat and indicate that you understand. But if you have any questions, just drop it on the chat. Thank you.
You could also, I think Emanuela shared with you my LinkedIn. So in case you want to like ask me questions privately, you could go to my LinkedIn and just drop me some questions and we could interact further from there. So the main thing is to be able to bring you guys to understand software development. And this is do you, when you're working, do you write? So we have some APIs, some language frameworks provide you with code generators, but the code generators work till a certain extent. Like you could have a code generator that basically it sets up a controller for you with all the sub methods, and then you have an endpoint. But now how your logic within the methods work, you have to write all those by yourself. So yeah, and we have had like a lot of code generators that are coming up these days that handle most of the scaffolding for you. So setting up the route, setting up the controllers, setting up the different methods within the controller. But it only does it to that extent because each and everyone's creation of API is different, and there's no, like, you may have a user with a first name and a last name, and I may have a user with a first name, middle name, and last name. And there's no way to centralize that into one code generator that actually builds everything for you. So code generators will only set you up with the scaffolding, but most of the business logic, you have to handle it on your own because it's unique to you and your use case.
Okay, guys. I just dropped Adil's LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out to him personally, you can check the chats and you can use the link. And if you have more questions, please just drop it because we'll be rounding up soon. But if you understand, as I earlier indicated, you can also indicate too on the chat. Thank you. Okay, as regards the link I dropped on the chat, you can connect with Adil. So guys, make sure you connect to Adil. And if you have personal questions, you can reach out to him via LinkedIn also. So please check the chat. And I dropped a link to his profile on LinkedIn. Yes. So if you still have more questions, you can just drop it before we round up. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay. Okay. So Adil, I think we'll be rounding up now, because this was like an introduction. So a lot of them are not really familiar with it. So most of them will have to go back to the video and go through it. So guys, for those of you that do not understand and you go back and watch the video, if you have questions, you can reach out to Adil personally. I dropped his LinkedIn profile, link to his profile on LinkedIn. So please make sure you go through the chat and connect with him. And for those that do not understand, when you go back and watch the video, because this video is being recorded, you can reach out to him via LinkedIn and he will answer every of your questions. Guys.
And you can also drop your questions on Discord so that we can collect it against next time. Thank you.
Okay, guys, so we'll be rounding up now. Adil, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so thank you so much for today's class. Thank you so much on behalf of Top Universe. So we'll be ending the class now. So guys, please, you can reach out to him. Yeah, and when we drop the video, so go back and watch it. And if you have questions, just reach out to him and also drop it on the Discord server too, so we can compile everything also. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Adil. Thank you guys for everyone that joined today. Yeah, have a great night. Thank you guys. Yeah, thank you so much, Adil.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.